On behalf of the organizing committee, the International Center for Innovation and Education, and other partners, including University of Riega, I am very happy to meet with you, Professor Roald Hoffmann, in order to talk about a number of issues and answering a number of questions. And this will be for the first keynote speech at the International Conference on Excellence and Innovation in Education and Psychology, which will take place in Rijeka, Croatia.
Well, I'm happy to be with you in this way. I'm only sorry I am not at the conference, but I wish all the participants very well in their beautiful setting and the very interesting things they're going to discuss.
We are very sorry too. I am very pleased to visit you in Cornell University and honored to interview during this visit. My first set of questions are relating to your childhood.
Yes.
The first question, will you please tell us in brief about your childhood? What did you gain from your early childhood?
Well, first of all, it's in a sense appropriate to where the conference is, because I'm part of the same history that the country where you are in has had. I'm the last generation of Hitler's gifts to America. The beginning of my childhood was terrible. It was in a difficult place, in a wrong time to be born Jewish in 1937 in southeast Poland. The first 2 years were happy. Clouds of war were gathering. And in 1939, the war began. The first 2 years, we were under Soviet occupation. It was not life-threatening in that time. It was difficult. For us, the worst time came with the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, 1941. The war lasted for us 3 years, 41 to 44. And when I say the war, that means the Second World War. Everyone has a war, perhaps, that they've lived through. Those 3 years were very difficult. And in those 3 years, I lost a good part of my family. My mother and I survived, but not my father, who was killed by the Nazis, and 3 or 4 grandparents were killed, and so on. We were, at the end of the war, hidden in an act of goodwill and courage by a friendly Ukrainian school teacher. Many of the Ukrainian population collaborated with the Nazis, but this one good man, at great risk to his family, hid us out for 15 months in a schoolhouse, in an attic of a schoolhouse. That's where I learned to read, by the light of a single window in that attic. 15 months we did not leave that schoolhouse. My mother was a school teacher. She taught me how to read. I looked at atlases. I grew up, anyway, as a child. 44, we were free. Finally, there were still 5 years of being refugees, as there are refugees today from Syria, from other countries. So we were refugees in Western Europe, in Poland and Western Europe, until we came to America in 49, and then we lived happily ever after. That's, whenever I would say anything critical of the United States, my mother would jump on me and say, never say anything bad about the United States, because it provided a home and then the education by which one could advance in a relatively classless society. And I took every advantage of that in public schools in New York City, and then eventually at Columbia and Harvard, and then I've been at Cornell for 51 years.
Very nice. Did anyone consider you as a gifted child and a young adult?
Probably not as a child, though I haven't defined what child means, but I did enter one of the elite New York City high schools, Stuyvesant High School, which was selected by a test and which to this day remains one of the great high schools in the world. And that was, in that high school, I was certainly selected on the basis of some intellectual gifts, and that high school offered incredible opportunities in science, but also in writing, in English and literature. The world really opened up then at the university afterwards. But yes, as a child, I was selected in this way for this special high school.
Were your teachers responsive to you in school? In other words, have you had good experiences with your teachers at schools and instructors at the university? That means they met your needs, like educational needs, social emotional needs, and so on.
In the high school, certainly, the teachers were responsive. So they were in a university, but the university was a little different. Interestingly, I'm a scientist, but the science instruction I got at Columbia University was not inspiring until my last year. Meanwhile, in a university which taught a core curriculum in the arts and humanities, meaning that every student took it, the world opened up in the arts and humanities. And sometimes I describe my college career as that I had enough courage to tell my parents that I did not want to be a real doctor. There was tremendous pressure on a child from a Jewish immigrant family to become a doctor. I didn't want to become a doctor. I told them I didn't want to become a doctor. I didn't have enough courage to tell my parents I wanted to be an art historian. That would have killed them. And so I became a chemist as a compromise. Actually, I didn't make up my mind about chemistry till 3/4 of the way through my PhD in chemistry. I took courses in other fields, but then I made a commitment, and it turned out to be just wonderful for me. Chemistry somehow met my psychology, and it's been very good for me.
Did you ever look for mentors?
I did look for mentors in college and also in graduate school. I also had very good mentors in summer research experiences while at the university. These were at national laboratories in the United States. They were summer jobs, but they were my introduction to research. And the people I had in those were very much mentors. Even though I didn't go on in those fields, they provided the encouragement that I needed. They introduced me to research.
And who was your best mentor?
I think my best mentors were my PhD mentors in graduate school, plus a teaching assistant, Bob Schneider at Columbia, who took a real interest in me. Teaching assistant, a graduate student in a chemistry course I was taking, a course that was boring, but he talked to me, and that made a difference. I remember his name, I remember him well. In graduate school, it was the natural mentors, my PhD advisor, Bill Lipscomb, and then Bob Woodward, with whom I worked on some important problems.
How do you keep the balance of work and family life and other personal issues as a distinguished, very busy scholar?
Sometimes people ask me, what is the most important thing to do in life? And I say it's to try to be as good a human being as possible, not to be as good a scientist as possible. And what is implicit in that is to have the mixture of family and society as well as one's profession. I work very hard now. I worked actually a little less hard when I had my children at home. I would work in the evenings, but the door was open. I'm not a particularly good example, even for spending time with the family. I do work very hard, and I do that to this day. I work till 9 o'clock in the evening, usually in the office. And right now, I'm not getting paid for any minute of it. I'm living on my pension, but I'm still active in research. I think one needs the balance. One needs the balance of family. That is very important. And one needs something spiritual, which takes different forms for different people. It may be, for some people, religion, actually, but it may be also taking care of an older parent. It may be hiking in nature. For many of us, it is music, and for me, it is literature and art in some way, which have provided the spiritual basis for my life. And it's very important to have passions like that, which are another leg to stand on as a balance. So family, passions, and science, or the profession, are the things that keep me going.
What skills, or in more specific terms, competencies, do you think have been important to your success? You are a writer, you are a distinguished professor, you are a Nobel laureate. There are many required competencies.
I'm not entirely sure, Taisir, what is the basis of all of the competences. I can trace my interests in, for instance, the writing, the literature, and the art, to university courses in those. At the university, and I read earlier, but there's a difference between reading a good novel like War and Peace at age 16 and reading it at age 20. At age 20, you have fallen in love and have suffered with the end of love, and that novel means something more to you than what it meant at age 16. So I think there is a right time and a right place to be introduced to these things. For me, it was the university years at Columbia. That's the art and literature. The science came along, somehow it came naturally. The summer research experiences I mentioned not only added to the coursework, they took the place of a foundation in science, an introduction to research. So I think that's very important. Otherwise, it's hard work and some luck and being interested in the world at large. The Nobel Prize was almost an accident in some ways. What I mean by an accident is you can aspire to do good work. To aspire, after the Nobel Prize, an old girlfriend reminded me that I had talked at age 17 while we were having a conversation in a coffee shop in Greenwich Village. And we were playing truth games, the kind of game where you ask somebody a question, they have to answer truthfully. And it was really on the way to talking about sex, but she asked the question, what do you really want to do in life? And I said, I'd like to win a Nobel Prize. Well, the point I want to make is it's only at age 17 that you would be foolish enough to say that. The reason is that you can aspire to do work of a quality of that type, but every year when a Nobel Prize is given out, people ask me, of course, friends, newspapers, who do you think is going to win it? And I give them a list of 5 or 6 people, and I'm never right. So what does that mean? That means I'm not stupid. I know who the good people are in my field. So at any time, there are 10 times as many people who have done work of quality that could be rewarded by a Nobel Prize, then are rewarded. So at the top, it's a chance event. And if you want to see that better, you can go away to literature. Do you think we needed the Nobel Committee to tell us that Toni Morrison or Norman Mailer were good writers? What we needed was to have the Nobel Committee tell us why they did not choose Jose Luis Borges, or why they chose Octavio Paz and not Carlos Fuentes, another great Mexican novelist. There is any number of people who do work of world class, and the Nobel Prize in Science is never a surprise, because we know it's only a surprise for the journalists. They make a surprise out of it, because that's what they think journalism is, that you call somebody up and he's surprised. My colleagues knew my work was good within a year of when it was done, and I got recognition for it in science, because we know what is good work. I got invitations to give a talk at Harvard. I got invitations to a conference. I had the recognition symbols, signals of what is good work. And so the Nobel Prize is a chance event. Of course, it made my mother happy.
We are happy too. You speak 6 languages, and you write poetry.
I have
One more?
No. I speak 4 languages well, but I can read in a dozen languages. And you're going to ask me, is that important, or is that something to achievement for? Americans wonder at it. So first part is, English was my 6th language when I came here at age 11. But you know, the Syrian refugees in Germany are going to be speaking 4 languages, not because they want to, but because they're refugees. You go from one country to another, no one has money to put you in a private school. You go to the local schools, you learn the language. That's what happened with me. That's how I learned German, for instance. And how I learned English eventually was because I had to learn them. The other part comes from, once you know a few languages, a few more doesn't matter. European languages are connected to each other. After I came to the United States, after those 6, there came French in school, and Swedish because my wife was from Sweden, and Russian because I went to Russia on an exchange. I have an easy time with languages.
So will you please tell us about your journey as a writer?
Well, I think, again, it began in the university that I appreciated. I remember still the poem, Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens, that Mark Van Doren, a great teacher, read for us, made me appreciate what a poem meant when I was about 19. The beginning is at the University of the Writing, but I did not try to write a poem till I was mid-age, middle life, around 40, and I did it then. I had the courage to do it. You are exposing yourself in some way in a poem. But it gave me a way to express myself in ways other than in chemistry. I then began to write after that some popular science, and essays, and I've written, and plays came later still. But again, the interest in theater began at the university. And again, I remember it was a production of Garcia Lorca's Blood Wedding at Barnard. I was at Columbia, and it was remarkably, it affected me. I had seen theater and musicals before, but that particular play turned me on. And eventually I came to write it. I've written everything except novels and short stories. So nonfiction, poetry, and plays is what I do. What I can tell you is it's much easier to make a living as a chemist than as a poet. And there are any number of ways of seeing that, but let me give you one. When I write a scientific paper, or when one writes a scientific paper, the acceptance rate in the very best journals may be 30% on papers. You go to the next rank below, and the sort of second-rank scientific journals, still good ones, the acceptance rate rises to 80%. For poetry, if you were to look in that second-rank poetry journal, the acceptance rate would be 3%. What does that tell you? It doesn't necessarily tell you that there are higher standards in poetry. It actually means that there are fewer poetry journals, more people writing poetry than are willing to pay for poetry journals. There is no National Poetry Foundation. The National Foundation for the Arts in the United States, which supports the arts and humanities, has a total budget which is half of what I and my colleagues bring in science support at my university alone. Their budget is $200 million. Cornell scientists bring in $400 million a year from research agencies. It just tells you what society is willing to do to support science and engineering versus poetry. Anyway, it's much harder to write poetry, but then maybe people don't do it to make a living. Very few do.
Could we say that intellectually creative individuals have very specific manifestation of cognitive direction in the studying of scientific problems and of the world at large?
I don't think it's necessarily creative individuals, but I think certainly scientists know how to concentrate their cognitive abilities during their working hours. I think we know how to concentrate on logical thinking or on the task at hand, but then do many other people as well. I'm not sure that scientists realistically are. First of all, one thing I'm convinced that is scientists are no better human beings than other people. You just look at how they treat their parents' children. You look at divorce rates of scientists, any criterion you want. They seem to be better able to apply their cognitive abilities during their working hours. They aren't necessarily better human beings.
And does the feeling of beauty has any role
Yes,
in scientific creativity?
I think it does. The feeling of beauty has an important role, but it's also subjugated by the ideology of science. What I mean is beauty is classified as a subjective emotion, a subjective feeling, and it has no place in being expressed in a scientific paper. You don't find in a scientific paper a statement, this molecule is beautiful. But you do find it in a talk that a scientist gives, where they relax a little and no longer follow those strictures about what you can say. But at the same time, they have aesthetic criteria in their work about beauty. A lot of things that are not convertible into mathematics. I use this word, not mathematicizable, are pushed down in the expression of scientists. I am talking about metaphor, about narrative, storytelling, about aesthetics, feelings of beauty. All of those figure in what scientists do, but they don't talk about them in their papers. And that's weird, because there is then a disjunction. I talk about it in things I've written about science. And I think my best writing, realistically, is reflective writing about scientists and about what scientists do. And in that writing, I can talk about expressions of beauty. For instance, I've written a series of 4 articles in a philosophy journal. The articles are called Molecular Beauty. And what I do is I look at my fellow chemists, and I try to analyze what are the aesthetic criteria that they apply to molecules. What makes them say, this molecule is beautiful? Is it because it's symmetrical? Yes, but hemoglobin is a molecule that looks like a clump of pasta congealed from primordial soup. It looks like a bunch of tapeworms. It is not symmetrical, and yet it's beautiful because of what? Because of its function, that it binds oxygen and transports it. So there are different criteria for beauty. I think it's very interesting to examine those, and then to compare the conventions or findings about beauty of a bunch of people who don't allow themselves to read what has been written for 2,500 years from Plato and Aristotle on about aesthetics, through Kant and Burke. They don't partake of that community, but they come to conclusions about beauty which are actually quite similar. So it's very interesting for me, who in a sense works in both worlds of the humanities and the science, to see the correspondence.
But sometimes we have bad molecules.
We have molecules that are bad, and we have bad people. So that's one of the things. This really works in it works in many directions. It's the same molecule that's good and bad. Anyone who's had an operation, a serious operation, knows what morphine is good for. That same morphine is addictive, and your doctor will get you off it as soon as possible. And a derivative of morphine, heroin, is a deadly addictive drug. Not any different molecule, the same molecule is good and bad. You know, to me that looks a little bit like what people are. People are not all evil or all good. They're not angels or devils. They're usually somewhere in between. And that's why, for me, in part, that's why chemistry is interesting, is because that heroin molecule has the potential of use and of abuse. That's what makes it interesting for me. Some of my colleagues think that there is a conspiracy in the press to attach the word toxic to the word chemical. There is no conspiracy in the press. The press is the press. It always has been. Good news is no news. Bad news is good news. Of course they want to make it, they want to stress bad things. But at the same time, our job is not to make angels of molecules. Our job is to have people see molecules as they see people. Potential of great good, potential of harm also.
But could we make innovators?
We can certainly enhance the conditions for creating creativity, for human beings becoming more creative. And that is what the people in your conference are at work in doing. There is no magic formula. There are many things one can do to enhance creativity, to enhance the good in people in some ways, and creativity is part of that good.
But sometimes we feel people are against, for example, gifted education. For that reason, we were searching for a new terminology like excellence in education, in basic education, higher education. Do you think we could achieve something in that direction?
Yes, a word matters a lot. So the search is not a bad idea for some new word. I just think of, for instance, somewhat different area, the word or the phrase sustainable development. Just the invention of that phrase in whatever language it is said, that has a lot hidden in those two words. And the word sustainable, that you need to have progress and economic achievement at the same time, while being of concern about pollution or the environment, that meant a lot. So I think excellence is in the right direction. I think we have to still search for the word, and I cannot come up with a word right now that would help you. I'm not sure I can. But I think everyone wants creativity to be enhanced, achievement to be enhanced. At the same time, everyone wants every human being to have at least to achieve the potential that they're capable of doing. One idea of education is, I think it goes back to, I once tried to trace it back, goes back to Thomas Aquinas, is that in education what we do is we awaken the individual, or we enable in the individual the powers that are always inherent there and that just haven't been opened up. And I like that because, first of all, I feel it matches it matches the greatest experience that any teacher has, which is of seeing the light go on in a student's eyes when they finally understand something. And that's not the light that goes on when they learn another fact, when they learn a 19th molecule or the 17th species. It comes from understanding something. And it means that light, which all of us had the experience of seeing, means that the powers are in there, that we have helped them develop.
So I read a very impressive article written by you and your colleague Sandra, and you propose like a number of strategies and tactics which can be employed by people in education. And this is for me, if I know you, I will say it is not strange. But if somebody else read it, say, oh, a Nobel Laureate is talking about educational issues.
Well, but yes, a Nobel Laureate, but also a professor at Cornell University. And what I mean to imply by that is that I teach. That is our existence in science, so to speak, in the United States. That scientific research is done mainly by university professors in the university setting. The teaching is an inherent part of what I do. One of the things I like about my university, Cornell, and why I have stayed here for 51 years now, is that we take teaching seriously. And I also have learned a tremendous amount from teaching about research. Anyway, early on, I was put to teach introductory chemistry. We have a total of over 2,000 people taking chemistry at any time, and perhaps 1,500 in various introductory courses. And I learned to like it. In fact, I always taught introductory chemistry for half of my time at the university. And that became a matter of choice rather than, as it was initially, the chairman of the department telling me that that's what I had to do. I liked it. I felt I was good at it. I learned from it something about explaining things. What I mean is, for instance, take thermodynamics, a subject of some complexity with a mathematical structure attached to it. I got A grades in graduate school in thermodynamics, but I really didn't understand thermodynamics till I had to teach it without the crutch of mathematics to a group of first-year students at Cornell. Also, it seemed pretty obvious to me that the strategies for good teaching at the introductory level at the university had great resemblance or analogy to the strategies I should use in writing my research papers, because I was basically in a business of explaining things in my research, and I was in the teaching explaining things. I had an audience. In the teaching, there were, in some of the classes, 400 young people out there. Some of them were asleep, some of them didn't understand, some understood everything before I said it. At the same time, I had to speak to all of those groups of people. When I write a research paper, I have no control over the audience. I cannot take the person who's reading the paper, the graduate student, and explain to them, this is what I meant and not this. It has to come from the words I have in that paper. And it has to come to an audience, part of which understands what I say, and part of the audience doesn't. It's a remote audience. To me, it seemed a similar thing. So to the extent I could, to the extent that the gatekeepers of scientific articles and journals allowed me, I wrote those papers for the graduate student. And I learned how to sneak in some things. From the teaching strategy I used in introductory chemistry, I think my papers are more readable to the graduate student. So I learned something.
Very nice. In previous interviews, you said, I love chemistry.
I do.
And do you mean that it is commitment and love are necessary components for scientific creativity? Or in other words, we can say you fall in love in what you're doing. And consequently, we have outstanding, outcomes.
You may not love it initially. I think of that hemoglobin molecule and its complexity of its involuted curves. It took some mix of a textbook that felt that it was important and imposed on me the necessity of learning that structure in order to maybe pass a test. It also took a friend who could be a teacher, a mentor. It happened to be, in that case specifically, another graduate student who told me with some passion what was interesting about this. This is analogous to a girlfriend or boyfriend dragging you to an art museum and saying to you, this painting is interesting or fun. Or something that happens among teenagers of playing, hey, listen to this, and you listen to this piece of music, and all of a sudden you like it. So there was a mixture of being required to, a mentor helping you, doing what? Getting me interested, getting me to love something that I did not love initially. Maybe that's the definition of a good teacher, what these people did to me, both of them.
Why you think that we have very little number of women in science, in general, and in chemistry in particular? Chemistry and physics.
We're getting better. We're getting better at training more women at PhD level in the United States. It's risen in 40 years from 10 to 15% to now to 40% in chemistry in the United States. We still have trouble getting enough women to apply for our assistant professorship. Just a year or two later, the percentage goes down. The pool is in some way there. There are many, many factors at work here. We're getting more women in science, and it's true for most countries, but not for some. Some have a lot of trouble. Two great scientifically advanced countries have real societal problems at getting women into science in sufficient numbers. They are Germany and Japan.
Yes. And now Sweden also.
It's so weird for Germany because every country around it, France, Poland, Denmark, has large numbers of women in science. But there's something in a culture that discourages that. Maybe it'll be fixed. Japan has several problems, but one of them is an insufficient number of women in science. We are getting close to parity in the United States. It wasn't that way. But sometimes people say that the reason we're getting more women in science, in chemistry, is because chemists aren't getting paid enough. What's happening, what I mean is, so where are the men going who would be chemists? They're going to business school. So that it's a very complicated societal problem. The structures of society have, and I'm talking about daycare centers and about recognition of achievement by women, have improved in the United States. Maybe we'll be lucky enough to get a woman as a president.
Professor Hoffmann, have times changed since you got the Nobel Prize?
Times for me, times for the world.
Times for you, times for the world, for this field of knowledge.
I got Nobel Prize in 1981. That was 34 years ago. Question for me is maybe how did you survive the Nobel Prize? And what I mean is if you get it when you're relatively young. I was 44 at the time. If you've been lucky enough, as I was, never to ask what is the next thing that I'm going to do, but just doing the next thing that I wanted to do scientifically and getting the support for it, when you get the Nobel Prize, people begin to ask, what are you going to do next? I mean, put it away from science. When Toni Morrison gets a Nobel Prize, people look at her next novel after Nobel Prize with a little more scrutiny than they do for the ones before. Something like that. If you're lucky enough never to have asked yourself, and enough people ask you, what are you going to do next? You begin to ask yourself the question. And that spoils the creative process in some way. So that it's okay, I've survived. I haven't become a university president. I've kept on doing my research. I'm still doing that 34 years later. It seems in science that the younger good people seem to be more obsessed with publishing in certain leading journals like Nature, Science, Cell. I don't get it. I never published a paper in those journals. It was okay. But they seem to say that you can't get the recognition unless you publish in. Otherwise, I don't think that much has changed in science. And there's a continuing flow of good young minds into science. The world, unfortunately, has not changed for the better. So even though we don't have the destruction of the world wars that caused the havoc in my life, I still need to worry about whether my grandchildren will not die in some war. They're teenagers now, so I think about that, two of them. It's no longer as much fun to travel because I have to go through all those security checks. So the world has not become better in that sense. We live longer, I think that's true. But there are other concerns and health problems that seem to be tied to environmental problems that we have. And we have this great concern about the warming of the atmosphere that we all have to face. And there is a conference going on right now in Paris that is trying to address problems of global warming. But the problems are so tied up with development that I think it's very difficult to see how much will be done, whether much will be done.
Do you think we can say that you have a different way of thinking when you handle a certain issue? For example, you can say this problem is solvable or it can be solved, this one is not, so you can trash it, something like this.
I think I do have a little different from other scientists, but part of it is conditioned by either my psychology or by my interest in the humanities. So let me try to explain. Unlike many scientists, I don't think things are right or wrong. When I see something, when I see a paper that has something that looks to me not right in it, I don't say this person's stupid. I try to figure out what's in that person's mind that made him say that. And I think things are neither completely right nor completely wrong, but usually somewhere in between. And I try to reason things out. I seem to have found in chemistry a science which is where things are not completely right or completely wrong. There are no theorems of chemistry. Things are, and that frustrates some people a lot, that things are not, and so that you have to in part understand, in part to memorize, and maybe hope for understanding. There's something in between. It's not mathematics.
In 1986, you have taped the television series The World of Chemistry, and you introduced chemical principles, theories. Is there any possibility to have similar important initiative?
The World of Chemistry is now almost 30 years old, and you know it's still used in American high schools and elsewhere. I get one email a week from some student. There are Facebook groups around the courses. Yes, we should have something better, something more up to date. It's expensive to produce television. We don't have it. I think something like that should be made. It would take a major grant to accomplish something like that. We were working to produce 26 half hours we were working with a budget of around $3 million to do that. It's expensive. It should be done.
And how could we change, the public awareness? Because the most important that, science popularization, how, could we make the public change their point of view, how they perceive, scientific knowledge and scientists?
The public has a mixed view of science and scientists. On the one hand, every poll that's ever taken puts scientists in a category of people who are admired and who are looked up to. Even the fact that in TV commercials someone put in the role of a scientist or wearing a white coat, often used to advertise some drug which you don't want, but that happens is some testimony to a position of authority or looking up to that people attribute to scientists. Then there are strange things like that in this country that half the people don't believe in the theory of evolution. That's this in the United States, or the difficulty that people have in accepting the very good evidence for global warming. These are, and the kind of political connections made around those things. Those are strange things. I think scientists are valued by society. I don't want to push too hard for changing perceptions of science. And I'm going to say something that not popular necessarily among scientists. I would not want a world ruled by scientists. The reason is they'll kill in the name of reason. What I mean is, if they think that people are wrong, rationally, to them, rationally wrong, they may impose that on people. I think we need a mixture. I think the arts and the humanities play a tempering role, and we need that as much as we need science in what governs. There's a place for reason, but there is a place for not only for compassion, but for seeing that psychological, emotional factors matter to human beings, that human beings are not machines. And that comes from the tempering moral role of the arts and the humanities, and even to some extent of religion, some aspects of religion. I think those are necessary for a balanced human life. I think we need more reason overall, but not a world run by scientists.
But also we do need, to increase the interest, in natural sciences among, the young kids.
So, yes and no. Let me argue a little, just to be contrary. If there were a need for more scientists in society, then they would get, I'm about to give a free market argument, which I don't like. And if there were a need for them, scientists would get paid more. And they're not getting paid more. Well, they're getting paid enough. A PhD in chemistry, going out to work in a company is getting $100,000 a year. That incidentally sounds like a lot more money to other people, but it's a beginning lawyer working at a big company in New York City will get $180,000 a year. Let me also argue the following way. There weren't enough computer scientists trained, so they get paid more. There's now enough computer scientists being trained. Do we need more scientists? I'm not entirely sure.
Do we need more researchers?
No, we need bakers and school teachers, craft brewers of beer, people who make TV shows. I think it would be nice to have scientists as normal characters in TV shows. Even Mad Men, actually Mad Men has this very strong moral lesson. I like what it did with the chemistry in there. And the Big Bang Theory, in its own comedic way, puts science up there. Very interesting. We need more of that. We need more My dream is a soap opera or novella featuring some women scientist in it in some steamy love affair. I think we need more of those.
How will the relationship between chemistry and other fields of knowledge change in the future?
Economically, there's always going to be jobs for chemists because people are in a business of transforming matter, and that's what chemistry is. We start with the natural world and we change it into something else. I think there will be employment for chemists. There are concerns within chemistry that it's being dematerialized in the sense that what matters is chemistry and biology and chemistry and materials, and there is no center any longer in chemistry. I think there'll be a center. There are chemical ways of thinking which are different from physical ways.
You said your mother were a teacher.
Yes.
And in this conference, we will have a good number of teachers.
Yes.
What you would like to tell them?
I tell them that several things. First of all, I admire you. You are on the front lines of what all of us are doing, which is teaching, as I said, awakening the powers in young people that they have. I understand the difficulty of your job, and especially I understand it in developing countries where there's so much pressure on young people to get a job, and the economic conditions which allow study just often do not exist, and there are societal pressures. I would say that if there is one thing which I would identify with success as a teacher is empathy, so that you and I know it's hard to do when you have 7 or 8 classes in a day, and pressures is to try to understand what the child, the human being before you, the young person, what they feel, what they understand, and try to put yourself in their place and see what they make of your words. The empathy with the student is, to me, the key to the success of good teaching.
What research areas excited you at the moment?
Right now, I'm very much in the borderline between chemistry and physics, in solid-state chemistry, solid-state physics. I'm interested in the design of new materials, extended structures, and not single molecules, but networks, be they like in salt and sodium chloride or metallic. I would love to design a room temperature superconductor. I don't think I'll do it, but I'm probing around. I'm also interested in convincing physicists that there is something in chemical ways of thinking. So it's a story about that different parts of science have different ways of thinking because of the education. But I think I can contribute something to our understanding of extended matter. I love to design new forms of carbon, alternatives to diamond or graphite. I'm working on that right at this moment.
We are happy you are networking between scientists, but also you are working to network between different groups of people, different nations, and you're already involved in this as a responsible, creative scientist.
I'm inherently international as a product of Europe and with all the languages that we've mentioned, and an immigrant to the United States. My wife is from Sweden. So we're inherently of this world. I'm interested in peace. Would be no surprise coming from the kind of background that I came and having suffered from war. I have a special interest in trying to develop good relations in the Middle East. In part it is because I have relatives in Israel. In part it is because I have had students and friends from the Arab world. But I've tried to organize some workshops and some conferences which bring together scientists from various countries in the Middle East, from the Arab countries, from Israel and Iran. I'm interested in differences and similarities, and I don't want to make everyone the same, but I'm interested in the cultural aspects of these things. It's not easy to organize something in that, but it can be done. I just come back from a conference we had in Morocco with chemists, mainly from those various countries. And this was 3 days after the bombings in Paris that the conference opened. And here we had 90 people meeting together and talking in a friendly manner, and also discussing not necessarily easy problems. What I mean, for instance, is water rights in Palestine and Israel, and the condition of the water supply in Gaza being terrible. The water table is depleted. There is a lot of nitrate in the water. Desalination is a possibility, and actually a growing possibility in general in the Middle East. It's economically feasible finally, but still not accessible, for instance, to the people in Gaza. Difficult subjects, but there was a lot of talk together. And while we were talking together, meanwhile there were crazies on Facebook threatening some of the people who were there. So we were very much in the world. We were trying for something.
As you know, the International Center for Innovation in Education tries to bring people from different disciplines,
Yes.
and to be interdisciplinary. So I am very pleased to meet with you at Cornell University, and I would like you to conclude this interview by something to the audience in this conference.
I think that in your conference, in your field, underlying your interest and work on excellence, and there is somehow an underlying belief in the human being and in the spirit of the human being, that there is something good about human beings that you can bring out. And I find that so encouraging. When the news around us bring us news of still another shooting, or of the troubles that the world has to agree on a course in the face of global warming, to see such a concentration on what is good in human beings, I think that's encouraging. It's encouraging to me, and I wish you all the best.